It started with a dull ache that I kept ignoring, the kind of pain you convince yourself is nothing more than stress, exhaustion, or just your body's way of reminding you to slow down. I was too busy being a wife, a new mother, and the glue that held our little home together to stop and listen. I told myself it would pass. It didn't. Instead, the ache grew into something sharp, something that woke me in the middle of the night and left me staring at the ceiling, feeling like my own body was trying to whisper a secret I didn't want to hear. Even then, I didn't make the appointment right away. When I finally walked into the sterile white hallway of the hospital, the fluorescent lights above hummed like they were mocking me. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and metal, and the sound of distant beeping machines created a strange rhythm that made my chest feel tight. I told myself I was here for nothing more than a precaution, that I'd get the all clear and go home to my husband, who would tease me for worrying too much, and to my baby, who would be drooling and giggling in his playpen. That was the script I had in my head. But the real story, it wasn't going to follow my script. The nurse's voice was soft, almost too soft, as she called my name. Her eyes lingered on me a little longer than I expected, and for some reason, it unsettled me. I followed her into the examination room, the paper on the bed crinkling under me as I sat down. I remember tracing the lines of my wedding ring with my thumb, the cool metal grounding me, reminding me that I had a life waiting for me outside these walls. But when the doctor came in, his expression told me that my life was about to change in a way I couldn't control. He didn't speak right away. He closed the door slowly, set my chart on the counter, and sat down across from me. His hands were folded in his lap, but his shoulders seemed to carry a weight I could almost see. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, practiced, the kind of tone you use when you've done this 100 times before, but it never gets easier. He said my name, and then he said the words I would replay in my head over and over. There's something we found, and it's serious. The medical terms blurred together like a language I didn't understand. I remember nodding, like maybe if I acted composed, it would make it less real. But inside, it felt like the floor had given way beneath me. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, faster and faster, until it drowned out everything else. I wasn't thinking about treatments or timelines or second opinions. The only thing my mind kept flashing back to was my baby's face, his small fingers curling around mine, his warm cheek pressed against my chest. The thought of not being there for him felt unbearable, yet at the same time, a strange, cold detachment began to creep in. It was as if my mind was already pulling away from the people I loved, as though some survival instinct was telling me not to hold on too tightly. The doctor kept talking, explaining the options, the steps, the what-ifs. But the words weren't landing. My eyes fixed on a small crack in the wall behind him, and I counted the jagged lines, anything to avoid absorbing the reality of what he was saying. I could feel the room getting smaller, the air thickening until every breath felt like work. Somewhere in the haze, I realized I was gripping the edge of the exam table so hard my knuckles had turned white. I thought about my husband, about how he'd react. He'd want to fight it, to research every possibility, to pour himself into fixing this. That's who he was, a fixer. But even imagining his face made me feel an unbearable heaviness. I didn't want him to see me like that, to watch me fade. I didn't want my baby's memories of me to be of someone weak, sick, and fragile. I wanted to disappear before that happened. It was a thought that terrified me, but it also planted something in me, a seed of an idea I didn't fully understand yet. When I finally left the hospital that day, the sun was too bright, the air too loud. I walked to my car as if I were underwater, every sound muffled, every movement slow. People passed me, talking, laughing, living, and I felt like I had stepped into another dimension where I didn't belong anymore. My hands shook as I turned the key in the ignition. The road home stretched ahead of me, familiar and safe, but it also felt like a path I wasn't sure I could walk anymore. My wedding ring glinted in the sunlight as I gripped the wheel, and, for the first time, it didn't feel like a promise, it felt like a weight. It happened on one of those days when everything felt like a blur, when my mind was running in 100 directions, but my body was just going through the motions. I had gone to a small cafe near the hospital after a follow-up appointment, one of those quiet places tucked away from the busy streets where you could hide from the world if you wanted to. I wasn't there for the coffee. I was there because I couldn't face going home just yet. My hands were still trembling from the appointment, my chest still tight with everything I wasn't ready to say out loud. I sat at a corner table, staring at the steam rising from my untouched cup when she walked in. She didn't enter like most people do, no glance at her phone, no distracted shuffling. She moved with the kind of presence that made the air shift around her. Her hair was pulled back loosely, strands falling around her face, and there was something in her eyes that I noticed before I could even figure out why I was noticing her at all. She ordered without looking at the menu, her voice low, steady, almost musical. When she turned and saw me watching, she didn't look away. She smiled. It wasn't the polite kind you give strangers, it was something that felt sharper, like she could see right through me. I don't remember deciding to speak to her. One moment, she was walking past my table, and the next, she had stopped and asked if I minded company. Her voice had that warmth that makes you lean in before you realize you're doing it. I nodded, and she slid into the seat across from me, setting her drink down carefully, her eyes still locked on mine like she was reading something there. She introduced herself simply, no long story, no explanation for why she was sitting with me. Her name lingered in my mind even as we spoke about nothing, weather, the coffee, how the city was changing. But there was something under the surface, a hum of energy I couldn't ignore. At first, I thought it was because she was beautiful, in that quietly dangerous way that makes you feel like you're on the edge of a cliff. But it was more than that. She listened differently. She didn't fill the silence just to fill it. She let it stretch between us, and in that space, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time seen, not as a wife or a mother or a patient, but as a person. Every time she tilted her head slightly while I spoke, or leaned forward like my words were worth catching, I felt my pulse quicken. I told her I'd been at the hospital, though I didn't go into the details. She didn't ask. That alone was strange to me. People always want to know, to pry, to fix. She just nodded like she understood without needing the specifics. Her hand brushed mine once when she reached for her drink, and it was such a small touch, but it sent a shock through me that I tried to hide. My mind told me it was nothing, just a stranger being polite. But my body didn't believe that. When she laughed, it wasn't loud, but it filled the air between us in a way that made me forget the heaviness sitting on my chest. I found myself leaning into her energy, the way her eyes lingered on my face, the way her smile curved slowly as though she knew more than she was saying. It was both unsettling and magnetic. I caught myself thinking about what it would be like to see her again, to hear her voice without the clinking of cups and the distant hum of the espresso machine in the background. She asked me if I came there often. I lied and said yes, even though it was my first time in months. I didn't know why I wanted her to think she might find me there again, but the idea of her walking through that door looking for me was something I couldn't push away. There was no reason for her to matter. She was a stranger, someone I'd known for less than an hour. But she was also the first person in a long time who made me forget, even for a few moments, that I was sick, that my life was unraveling behind closed doors. We talked until my coffee had gone cold and the sky outside had shifted toward dusk. She didn't check her phone once. I noticed because I kept expecting her to get up, to say she had to go, but she didn't. She stayed until I was the one who had to stand, even though I didn't want to. She told me she hoped to see me again, her tone light but her eyes saying something heavier. I walked out of that cafe with her voice still in my ears, my steps slower than usual, like I was trying to stretch out the space between goodbye and the next time I might see her. It didn't happen in one sudden explosion of decision. It was more like a slow, steady leak in the foundation of my life, until one day I realized I was already halfway gone. At home, everything looked the same from the outside. My husband still kissed my forehead in the mornings, my baby still reached for me with those tiny, trusting hands. But I was moving through the days like a ghost, my body present, but my mind somewhere else entirely. I tried to push her out of my head, tried to remind myself of the promises I'd made and the life I had built, but every attempt only seemed to make her presence stronger. It wasn't just her face I thought about, it was the way I felt when I was around her. The weight I carried seemed to lift, the tightness in my chest loosened. She made me feel alive in a way I couldn't ignore. I started finding excuses to see her. A quick coffee after an appointment. An afternoon walk when I told my husband I needed fresh air. It was never anything inappropriate at first, just conversations, just time. But each meeting left me craving the next, and soon the lines I had drawn in my mind were blurring. I would hear her voice in the quiet moments at home, picture the way she tilted her head when she was really listening. The connection was like a pulse I couldn't stop feeling. At night, I'd lie in bed beside my husband, listening to his steady breathing, and wonder how I could feel so far away from someone who had been my whole world. I loved him in the way you love someone who has been part of you for years, deeply, instinctively, but the love felt heavy now, weighted with responsibility, with memories of the life we were supposed to keep building. The more I thought about the time I had left, the more I questioned whether I wanted to spend it living out the version of life I had chosen before my diagnosis. It felt selfish. It felt cruel. And yet, I couldn't silence the thought that I needed something different before the end. The day I finally left wasn't marked by a fight or some dramatic confrontation. It was almost unnervingly calm. My husband was in the kitchen feeding the baby, his voice soft as he sang under his breath. I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching them. Part of me wanted to walk in, take the spoon from his hand, and pretend I hadn't been thinking about leaving for weeks. But another part of me, the part that had been growing louder with every passing day, told me this was my moment. I walked into the bedroom and began packing a small bag, my hands trembling even though I was trying to convince myself this was clarity, not chaos. Every sound in the house felt amplified, the clink of the spoon in the baby's bowl, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. I folded my clothes carefully, not because I cared how they looked, but because it felt wrong to be careless in that moment. I didn't take much. Just enough to leave without looking back right away. My wedding ring sat heavy on my finger as I zipped the bag, and I stared at it for a long time before deciding to keep it on, at least for now. When I stepped back into the kitchen, my husband looked up and smiled, completely unaware of the storm in my head. I kissed my baby's forehead, inhaling the scent of him like I could store it somewhere deep inside me. My husband asked where I was going, and I told him I needed some time, that I was going to stay with a friend. It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. He searched my face for an explanation, but I kept my eyes steady, not letting them show the pull that was dragging me away. I walked out the door with my bag slung over my shoulder, the late afternoon light casting long shadows on the driveway. I didn't look back right away. I told myself I couldn't, that if I saw them standing there, I might turn around. My car door felt heavier than usual, the handle cold against my palm. As I slid into the driver's seat, I saw my reflection in the rearview mirror, a face I barely recognized, caught between fear and something dangerously close to relief. The engine came to life under my hands, and the sound seemed to fill the space where my thoughts had been, drowning them out just enough to let me shift into gear. The road ahead wasn't unfamiliar, but it felt different now, like each mile was taking me further from the version of myself I had been and closer to someone I didn't fully know yet. I kept waiting for the wave of guilt to crash over me, for my hands to start shaking so badly that I'd have to pull over, but instead there was only a strange, steady hum in my chest. My phone buzzed once in the passenger seat, my husband's name lighting up the screen, but I didn't pick it up. The sun was sinking lower, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about what tomorrow might bring. I was only thinking about where I was going now. The first few weeks felt like stepping into another world, one where the rules I'd been living by no longer applied. She welcomed me into her small apartment, a space that smelled faintly of jasmine and coffee, with walls covered in photographs and sketches that told pieces of her story without words. Everything about her life felt different from mine, messy in a way that was freeing, unplanned in a way that made every day feel unpredictable. There was no schedule dictated by nap times or work deadlines, no quiet tension hanging in the air from unspoken worries. Instead, there were late nights on the balcony with the city lights glowing beneath us, our laughter spilling into the air like we had all the time in the world. She had a way of looking at me that made it hard to breathe, like she wasn't just seeing my face, but mapping out all the places I'd been hurt, all the pieces of me I'd tried to keep hidden. When she touched me, it wasn't rushed or routine. It was deliberate, like every brush of her fingers was meant to remind me I was still alive, still worth noticing. Her confidence wasn't loud. It was in the way she moved through the room without apologizing for the space she took up, the way she could silence my spiraling thoughts with just a glance. Days blurred together in a haze of impulsive choices. We'd wake up late, tangled in sheets, and decide to drive somewhere hours away just because the weather was nice. We ate meals at odd times, in small diners or on park benches, and she'd tell me stories about her past, some that made me laugh until my stomach ached and others that she shared so quietly I could barely hear her over the hum of passing cars. She never pushed me to talk about what I'd left behind, but I found myself telling her things anyway, confessions that slipped out in the soft space between midnight and dawn. The city felt different with her beside me. Streets I'd walked 100 times before suddenly felt electric, like the air was charged. She'd stopped to take pictures of things I would have never noticed, shadows on a brick wall, the way sunlight caught in a puddle, a stranger's reflection in a shop window. Being with her made me notice the world again, like I'd been walking through it half asleep and she'd shaken me awake. There was a rush to it all, an intensity that made my heart race in ways I didn't fully understand. Even the silences between us felt alive, charged with something I couldn't name. I started to crave that feeling, the way being near her drowned out everything else, my diagnosis, my guilt, the unanswered calls from my husband. In her presence, those things felt far away, almost unreal. It was dangerous how easy it was to let myself forget. At night, we'd lie on her couch or in bed, music playing low, her arm draped over me. Sometimes she'd trace patterns on my skin absent-mindedly, her touch both soothing and electric. I'd close my eyes and focus on the rhythm of her breathing, pretending that the rest of the world didn't exist. The intimacy between us wasn't just physical, it was in the way she listened when I spoke, in the way she remembered the smallest details of what I told her. She'd bring me my favorite tea without asking, or send me a picture of something that reminded her of a story I'd told. It made me feel chosen in a way I hadn't felt in years. There were moments when I'd catch her watching me with an intensity that made me feel like she was memorizing me, like she knew this wouldn't last forever. I didn't ask her what she saw when she looked at me like that, afraid the answer would unravel the fragile bubble we were living in. I knew we were suspended in something temporary, but the temporary felt intoxicating. It felt like the only thing keeping me from collapsing under the weight of what I'd left behind. Sometimes, when the apartment was quiet and she was still asleep, I'd get up and stand by the window, looking out over the dark streets. I'd think about my baby's soft hair, the sound of my husband's voice, and for a few seconds, the reality of what I'd done would crash into me. But then I'd hear her stir in the bed, her voice calling me back, and I'd let the guilt fade into the background again. With her, it was easy to believe that this was the life I was meant to have, even if only for a little while. It didn't unravel all at once, but I could feel the shift like a slow change in the weather, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. The little things started disappearing. The way she used to greet me with that eager smile faded into distracted glances. Our conversations, once endless and filled with laughter, began to stall in awkward silences. She seemed restless, always glancing at her phone or making vague excuses to leave the room. I told myself it was nothing, that we were just settling into something quieter, but the truth was harder to deny with each passing day. There were nights when she didn't come home until late, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. When I asked where she'd been, she'd answer casually, too casually, like the question didn't deserve more than a few words. The openness we once had was gone, replaced by a careful distance that made me feel like a guest in her space. I could feel her slipping away, but I didn't know how to reach for her without seeming desperate. I began to notice the absence of her attention in ways that cut deeper than I expected. She used to notice every detail, when I changed my hair, when I wore something new, when my mood shifted. Now, I could sit in front of her with my thoughts spilling over, and she wouldn't seem to see me at all. I started wondering if she had already found someone else to look at the way she once looked at me. The thought gnawed at me in the quiet hours of the night, keeping me awake long after she had fallen asleep. My body began to feel heavier, weaker. The diagnosis I'd been running from didn't care about my attempts to distract myself. Some days, I could barely get out of bed. I needed her in ways I hadn't before, not just for the excitement or the escape, but for the comfort, the care, the reassurance that I wasn't going through this alone. But instead of stepping closer, she seemed to pull away, as though my illness was a shadow she didn't want to stand in. Her touches became less frequent, her voice less warm. I told myself she was just overwhelmed, but deep down I knew she was retreating. The arguments started small, sparked by nothing important, dishes left in the sink, a misplaced set of keys. But underneath those small irritations was something raw and unspoken. I could hear it in the sharpness of her tone, feel it in the way she avoided my eyes. The woman who once made me feel alive now seemed irritated by my very presence. I started holding back, afraid that if I pushed too hard, she would give me the truth I didn't want to hear. I thought about my husband more than I admitted to myself, about the way he had never turned away from me when things were hard, about the steadiness I had traded for the rush of something new. I remembered the sound of my baby's laughter, the warmth of his tiny body against mine. Those memories started to creep in more often, uninvited but insistent, especially on the days when she made me feel like I was asking for too much just by existing in her space. The tension between us thickened until it seemed to fill every corner of the apartment. Meals were eaten in silence, our conversations reduced to the bare minimum. I found myself searching her face for signs of the woman I had fallen into so recklessly, but all I saw was someone already halfway gone. I didn't know how to stop it, how to pull her back, or if I even had the strength to try. I had left behind so much for this, believing it would be worth the risk, and now I was standing in the middle of something that felt like it was dissolving in my hands no matter how tightly I tried to hold on. Some nights, I would lie awake while she slept, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing and feeling an ache in my chest that had nothing to do with my illness. I would reach out to touch her, to close the distance, but stop short, my hand hovering just inches from her skin. It was as if I was afraid that if I touched her, I'd feel the truth, that she wasn't mine anymore, if she ever truly had been. I could feel the walls going up between us, higher each day, and I didn't know if I had the strength to climb over them or if I was already too tired to try. The apartment feels bigger now, but not in a way that's comforting. It's the kind of space that echoes, where even the smallest sound, my cough, the creak of the floorboards, feels too loud because there's nothing to fill the silence. She's gone, not just from the apartment, but from my life entirely. No note, no real goodbye. Just a slow fading until one day there was nothing left to hold on to. I told myself I should have seen it coming, that her absence had been building for a long time, but the finality of it still stung in a way I wasn't prepared for. Days pass in strange, uneven rhythms. Sometimes I sleep for hours in the middle of the day, waking up disoriented to the pale afternoon light spilling across the couch. Other times I stay awake all night, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second a reminder of how little time I have left. The illness has moved further into my body now. My breath comes shorter, my muscles ache with even the smallest movements, and there are moments when I can feel my heart struggling against the weight of it all. The world outside continues without me, but in here, time feels thick and heavy, like I'm wading through it. There are no visitors. My phone barely rings anymore. The friends I once had drifted away after I left my husband, their voices growing colder until they stopped calling altogether. Even the people who meant well don't know what to say to me now. I've become a story they tell in lowered voices, a warning, a tragedy they can discuss without having to be part of it. I wonder sometimes if my husband hears about me, if he tells himself he doesn't care, or if some part of him still does. I think about my baby, how old he is now, what his laugh sounds like, whether he's started to forget me or if my absence is still a question in his small, growing mind. The isolation seeps into everything. I've stopped opening the curtains most days because the light feels too sharp against the reality of the room. My reflection in the darkened glass is thinner now, my eyes sunken, my hair dull. I barely recognize myself, and when I do, it's like looking at a stranger I don't particularly like. Meals are an afterthought. Sometimes I eat just enough to keep from feeling faint. Other times I go the whole day without touching a single bite because it doesn't seem to matter anymore. Memories creep in when I'm too tired to fight them. The first time I held my son, the weight of him against me, the way his tiny fingers gripped mine. My husband's face the night we brought him home, tired but lit with a kind of pride I'd never seen before. I left all of that behind for something that felt like fire in my hands, only to watch it burn out, leaving nothing but cold ash. I wonder if I was chasing freedom or just running from the fear of being seen as fragile. Either way, I've ended up here in this quiet room, with no one left to hold my hand when the nights get too long. The sickness has a way of making every day feel both urgent and endless. I know my time is shrinking, but the hours still stretch out, filled with nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the occasional hum of the refrigerator. I try not to think about the moment when my body will finally give in, but it's impossible not to. I imagine it happening here, in this empty apartment, the air still heavy with the scent of her perfume in places I haven't cleaned, even though she's been gone for weeks. I picture the way it will feel to close my eyes and not open them again, to have no voice calling my name, no hand resting on mine in those final seconds. There's a particular weight that comes from knowing you've built your own solitude. I chose this path, piece by piece, each decision leading me further from the life I once had and deeper into this loneliness. The irony isn't lost on me, that in running toward love, I ended up here, with nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat in an empty room. The clock keeps ticking, the air grows colder, and the world outside my window moves on without me. Sometimes I think about what people will say when they hear I'm gone. Maybe they'll shake their heads and say they saw it coming, that it was the natural end to a reckless story. Maybe some will call it karma, a punishment for walking away from a family that loved me. Others might paint me as a tragic figure, someone who chased love in the face of death and simply lost her gamble. I imagine my name coming up over coffee, in text messages, in quiet gossip passed along like a secret, how they'll dissect my choices, turn my life into a cautionary tale for someone else. I can already hear the judgment in their voices, the subtle self-satisfaction that it wasn't them. When I first left, I thought my story was one of defiance and courage, of refusing to waste my last years in something that no longer made me feel alive. I thought I would be remembered as someone who seized the time she had left, who refused to settle. But the narrative has twisted somewhere along the way. Now I see the gaps, the things that will be left out of the version people tell. They won't know about the nights I lay awake listening to my baby breathe in the next room, knowing I was about to break his world in ways he couldn't yet understand. They won't hear the way my husband's voice cracked when he asked me to stay. They'll never see the tears I wiped away before knocking on her door, praying that this leap into the unknown would save me from feeling like I was already dying. There's a kind of cruelty in how simple it will all seem to people on the outside. They won't see the gray areas, only the stark lines. I left my family. I got sick. She left me. I died alone. Those bullet points are clean and easy to digest, but the truth is jagged and messy. I didn't leave because I didn't love my husband or my son. I left because something in me was desperate to feel a certain kind of heat before the illness took everything from me. I told myself it was about freedom, about passion, but maybe it was just fear of becoming nothing but a patient, a burden, a fading shadow in the background of someone else's life. I wonder sometimes if my husband will even come to the funeral. Will he feel he owes me that? Or will he stay home with our son, explaining in words I can't imagine how his mother is gone? I don't know if I want him there out of love or out of some need to prove that I still mattered to him, even after everything. As for her, I don't even let myself picture it. I doubt she'll show. It's easier to believe she'll keep her distance, that she's already folded my existence into some closed-off corner of her mind, filed under mistakes she doesn't talk about anymore. I think about my son the most. He'll grow up with stories about me, but which version will he hear? Will I be the mother who loved him but couldn't stay? Or will I be reduced to a selfish woman who abandoned her child for her own desires? I wish I could sit down with him, years from now, when he's old enough to understand the complexity of human weakness. I'd tell him that I loved him more than anything, even when my actions didn't show it. I'd tell him that leaving didn't mean he wasn't enough, it meant I was terrified, and in that terror, I made choices I can't take back. But I know I won't get that chance. There's no way to rewrite the ending now. The story has been written in the choices I made, in the bridges I burned, in the hands I let go of. I can't ask for understanding from people who only know the outline of what happened. I can't undo the way my life looks from the outside, stripped of the moments that made it complicated, human, and flawed. All I can do is sit here in the quiet, tracing the lines of my own story in my mind, knowing it will be reshaped the moment it leaves my lips, or more likely, the moment it leaves my body and becomes something for others to tell. The truth will stay here with me, in the last breaths I take, in the thoughts I don't share, in the memories that die the moment I do. 1.